first thing we heard was an announcement over the PA system. Our principal came on and just said, "May I have your attention, please? This is a follow-up to our previous announcement. The president has died." I was in study hall, which took place in the high school library, and I was the librarian for that hour. So I was behind the librarian's desk, and this announcement came over that the president had been shot. And they talked a little bit about him being taken to the hospital and stuff, and that, you know, that kind of put a pall over everything. And then we went through 2 more classes, and when I was in my typing class, they made the announcement that he was dead. And we were trying to take a time typing test and keep your mind on it. So it was pretty unnerving because you didn't know by who, why, or anything. And being a teenager, that was I think our biggest exposure to something that was such national impact, and not knowing what was going to happen next.
This was a Catholic elementary school. I remember that our principal came into our 8th grade classroom and whispered something to our teacher in our teacher's ear, and that her face just had a shocked expression on it. And we all knew that something was wrong. We didn't know what it was. And within minutes then we heard an announcement over our PA system that said that we were, the entire class or school was going to be going over to the church. So we went to church, and it was there then that the priest made an announcement that, you know, our president had been shot. And you know, there were from 1st grade to 8th graders in the church at that time, and obviously there was a lot of, I remember just a lot of noise, a lot of, you know, all the students were shocked and concerned, and I think, you know, some of the little kids were frightened. And, you know, so then we all, you know, the priest led us in prayer, prayed for, you know, our country, prayed for the president, and certainly for his family.
I guess I was doing something that day I wasn't supposed to be doing. Played hooky from school. My friends and I had girlfriends over in Pembroke, Georgia. So on this particular day, we went to school, and we checked in, got marked present. We stayed for a couple of classes. Then we hopped in the car and we left campus and drove over to Pembroke to see our girlfriends. And on the way back from Pembroke, driving through the military reservations, we had the radio on in the car. And the car was a 1955 Ford Fairlane. I can remember this stuff vividly. 59 Ford Fairlane, 4-door sedan, and it was the light chocolate and white. That's what the color of the car was, the colors rather of the car. And as we were riding through the reservation, listening to the radio, they interrupted the station and said that the president had been shot. And so we kept listening, and we rode through the town, and we got back at school just in time as the school day was coming to an end, which was roughly about 3:15 or so. And when we got on campus and we turned the corner by the band room, and we saw all of the students outside, and they were you know, they were just crying and just weeping as a result of what had happened. So I have a very clear, vivid imagery of what occurred on that particular day.
I was in class, and I can remember it very clearly, and it was about time to leave. It was about time for us to go get on the school bus to leave. And my teacher came in, and her name was Miss Miller, and she was a younger lady, and she walked in the classroom, and she just stood in front of us and was sobbing. And of course we were all alarmed, and we just stared at her for a while, and she finally said, "Our president is dead." And at that age, I was very confused about what, why, how, and the principal came in and took her out again. And then the principal walked in and said, I'm going to get you to your buses. From there, I remember going home and being scared and sitting then and watching the TV and watching that TV all weekend.
Actually, we were home. We were out of school that day, and I was at the kitchen table doing my homework. I was actually answering a question on tuna canneries. And being Catholic, the minute we heard that, it was just people, the phone started ringing. We got calls from everybody. You know, you immediately just stop what you were doing to start praying for the president. And I just remember that it was just such a shocking moment that it's just something that just I'll never forget.
I was in biology class. It was Coach Jett, who was our teacher. He was the assistant football coach, and he also taught biology. Didn't know a damn thing about biology, but he was a good man. And the announcement came over the PA that the president has been shot. Now, President Kennedy was extremely unpopular among the white community in the South because of his support for civil rights and desegregation. And I was in a public, still segregated high school. When the announcement came over the PA system, cheers erupted from every classroom around us, all up and down. There was just whooping and hollering and people clapping and yelling. Coach Jett was quite a disciplinarian, and so people hesitated in our class to break into any sort of celebration. And Coach Jett looked at us and he said, "Anybody who cheers, I'm going to beat the hell out of you. You do not celebrate. A man has been shot. You shut up. No cheering." And our classroom remained perfectly silent. That was the first announcement that he had been shot. The day continued as normal. Because, I mean, the first announcement, it didn't sound very serious. It was just sort of a, you know, we have received a report that President Kennedy has been, I don't think they even said shot, I think they said fired upon or something like that. And we'll let you know if we hear anything else. Then the second announcement came, it was the next period, and I was in choral music. And the announcement came over that President Kennedy has in fact died. And by that point, I think, you know, sort of the seriousness of what had happened had kind of sunk in. There was no cheering over that announcement. But I remember us sitting on the bleachers in the choral music room, and everybody sounded kind of going, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And our teacher then said, "I want you all to stand." And we all stood. And he said, "Let's sing Dixie." And so the class went into a chorus of Dixie.
I wish I was in Dixie, hooray, hooray, in Dixieland.
We can't cheer, but we can sure sing. And I remember just feeling sick. In fact, I remember there were a couple of us who sat down. Because I had liked Kennedy. I really did admire the man.
From Dallas, Texas, the flash, apparently official, President Kennedy died at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time, 2 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, some 38 minutes ago. Vice President Lyndon Johnson has left the hospital.
When my parents got home from work, my dad was really upset. And of course, we had the news on through dinner and everything. We had all the coverage on for the 3 days.
At that time, I was very upset. about it, didn't even fathom that something like that could occur to the president. Impacted in a sense that during that time in 1963, living in the state of Georgia, we were still dealing with segregation, and President Kennedy, for those of us living under those conditions, provided for us a ray of hope in terms of ending segregation. So it was like the light of hope was, smushed out.
It was probably very similar to what 9/11, recently what 9/11 is, that, everybody was glued to the television.
Regarding the probable assassin, the sheriff's officers have taken a young man into custody at the scene.
You can't believe the sadness and the shock, and we were glued to the TV. At that time, you didn't have very many channels to watch, but there was nothing else on but the assassination of John F. Kennedy, and we were watching it every minute we could.
The television set, this was the 60s, the television set was on all the time, and all the networks had suspended programming, and it was, nonstop news. And yes, we talked about it at dinner, we talked about it over breakfast.
The other thing I remember at that age was watching right after, or I don't know if it was during the funeral, after the funeral, or whenever Oswald was being taken downstairs to leave, all these people were around him, and I was watching, and Jack Ruby shot him.
There is Lee Oswald. He's been shot. He's been shot.
Now today, that doesn't seem as a big deal to watch somebody being shot. It's all over TV. But at that time, to watch that eyewitness of somebody being shot, and still to this day, confused about the whole relationship of Oswald, Jack Ruby, the president, that's what I remember.
That happened right in front of our faces. We were watching that on television on Sunday morning, and just the horror of, first of all, feeling this man was responsible for the murder, or yes, certainly was reported to be responsible for the murder of the president, and then to see him gunned down in the same way, and all of the chaos that ensued after that, on television. It was just really a traumatic and just almost a very unreal situation.
We went to church on Sunday morning and came back. And I remember my father saying, let's not turn on the television. Let's not turn on the television. No one, I've had enough of this. Let's not, And so we ate breakfast without the television on. And then finally somebody said, well, let's turn on the television to find out what's going on. And we turned on the television and turned it on just moments after Oswald had been shot.
I loved horses, and I remember very clearly the caisson picking up the body in the casket and taking it, I think, from the White House to the Capitol building, and then I think later from the Capitol building to the grave. I remember that caisson, and I remember there were white horses, and I'm not sure if there were 2, 4, or 6 white horses pulling that caisson, and you could hear the clip, clop, very clear in silence even through the TV. Then behind the caisson was a black horse, and the black horse was a riderless horse, and it had a boot in the stirrup that faced the opposite way. And I remember that the horse's name was Blackjack, and it was an honor that it is a fallen soldier.
And now sometimes I look back and I go, gee, what if? And it goes clear back to Kennedy, the what if. What state would we be in now? What would be different?
The other thing embedded in my memory from the event would be John saluting the casket. And I can see it as clear as day.
My memory of the 60s basically was of one assassination of a good person after another after another.